You know, it's been ages since I've done a standalone review of a Famicom game. I think it's about time to fix that. For the 7 people who have been following my channel before the Hong Kong 97 video, you may remember the videos I made about the best Japan-exclusive platformers and shooters on each retro console. I ended up giving both Famicom spots to games made by Konami, Akumajo Special for Best Platformer, and Crisis Force for Best Shooter. Those are both excellent games, and in today's video I don't necessarily intend to overturn those decisions. But there's a very special game I've put off talking about. I wanted to become more familiar with it, really get a grasp on the entirety of both the story and gameplay so that I could accurately convey the experience and do it justice. The game is this: Moon Crystal. Moon Crystal is a 2D platformer released on the Famicom only in Japan in 1992 by the relatively lesser-known Hector, whose name is read simply as Hecht in Japanese. The game is about a boy trying to save the residents of his town, who have been kidnapped by some mysterious, fiendish characters. We eventually learn this is the work of an evil count who is out to use the power of the Moon Crystal, a talisman kept under safeguard throughout the generations, to raise the dead and possibly fulfill some evil ambition. Don't worry, I assure you I'm not giving the whole thing away. This is all played out in story sequences similar to the Ninja Gaiden games, and they immediately set the somber, brooding atmosphere which permeates the game. Once the action starts, you take control of Ricky, the green-haired boy who managed to escape the Count's henchmen, and traverse 6 stages to keep the Moon Crystal from falling into the hands of evil, and save maybe the world, or maybe just your little hamlet in the middle of nowhere. The very first thing you'll probably notice, and the very thing that's given the game a bit of a name among die-hard import lovers, is the animation. While most Japanese-developed platformers in the 8-bit era kept to the philosophy that more than 3 frames of running animation is a waste, the artists behind Moon Crystal decided they wanted their characters' movement to be silky smooth and as realistic as possible, to the point that many gamers will be surprised that this is even possible on the Famicom. Ricky's running animation convincingly conveys the separate movement of all 4 limbs. His hands gracefully swing upward when he jumps. Even his ducking motion has at least 3 frames. In most NES games, when a character stabs forward with their sword, it looks like this. In Moon Crystal, it looks like this. And this impressive animation isn't limited to the main character. The enemies were given equal treatment. When bad guys throw rocks at you, their arms swing forward realistically. Archers load their bows, and skeletons lunge forward as if they were being manipulated by expert puppeteers. Until seeing Moon Crystal, I just figured this kind of animation was beyond what the console could do. Naturally, including this many frames of animation in a platformer is going to affect how the game controls, and Moon Crystal's action elements pretty much all revolve around this. Many people compare Moon Crystal to Prince of Persia, and it's very likely the developers took inspiration from it. You can even hang on ledges and pull yourself up in the same way. This made me wary initially, because, personally, I find the jump 2 seconds after pressing the jump button, memorize every single hidden trap gameplay of games like Prince of Persia and Out of This World to be absolutely insufferable. Thankfully, Moon Crystal doesn't play anything like those games. It's a true reflex-based platformer. Your 2 most important actions, attacking and jumping, are unaffected by the extra frames of animation. Well, maybe the sword slash is just the tiniest bit slower to react than attacking in Mega Man or Ninja Gaiden, but I never found it once to be inefficient. The one thing that gets dragged down by the extra animation is changing directions. Turning around takes noticeably longer than in any other 8-bit platformer I've played, and it's even more pronounced because the other actions are actually so much brisker than I had expected. Even after owning it for a couple years now, I still put myself in dangerous situations because I tried to jump before turning around sometimes. Thankfully, it rarely leads to deaths. And even more thankfully, you can turn around on a dime while jumping, so the programmers clearly understood the drawback of the delay. As for ducking, it appears as if there's quite a delay between when you press the D-pad down and when your character actually completes the action. But as far as I can tell, your hitbox contracts as soon as the animation starts, so this isn't a problem either. As for techniques, the sword slash is pretty much all you'll have throughout the game. There are several different power-up items inside treasure chests though. A sword item that makes your slash longer, boots that allow you to double jump, heart containers that increase your max life, a diamond that makes you invincible for a few seconds, and the occasional life replenish and 1-up. Once you've acquired the boots, more powerful sword, and extra life containers, you'll be feeling pretty unstoppable. But items only keep their effect for the current level. Once you beat the boss, you'll have to start over from scratch again. Some people may find this annoying, but the game was clearly designed with this system in mind, so it's not devastating. So the animation is highly impressive for a game of this era, and for the most part it doesn't negatively affect it as an action game. But those aren't the only reasons I decided to review it. The 6 stages in Moon Crystal all represent different steps along the story, and this is where I hope you'll begin to see why it's more than just another platformer. Stage 1 has you in a forest because you're running for your life from a small remote village. When you get a clue about the person who may be responsible, you decide to head for his mansion, and Stage 2 accordingly takes place in the town on the way to the perimeter of the mansion. Stage 3, of course, is inside of the mansion and gives off a bit of Castlevania vibe. Then you discover the Count has escaped to an island, so Stage 4 takes place on a pirate ship. When you get to the island, you have to pass through the mines of Stage 5 before you can reach the research lab of the Count deep underground, where the final trial takes place. There are certainly other NES games that build a story and even attempt to tie it in with the gameplay and stage design, but rarely this convincingly. Ninja Gaiden and Vice Project Doom both use cutscenes to tell a story and give a sense of congruency to the progression of the game, but I never feel an irrevocable connection between them. For example, in Ninja Gaiden 2, you go from a forest, to a castle, to a cave. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, it works perfectly fine, but I can't positively say it would lose or gain anything if the story were omitted altogether. But in Moon Crystal, the aesthetics always tell you what you're trying to accomplish in relation to the story, and this is where it shines. No pun intended. Of course, none of this would work if the artwork and music weren't up to speed, and both categories have been given just as much care as everything else we've looked at so far. There's an asymmetry to the environments that keeps them from looking like generic graphic stamps lined up together. Instead, you feel like you're in an organic, living world. The color palette is restrained to darker hues to keep with the sinister story and unsettling themes, but never appears drab or drowned out. The music fits both the environments and story sequences absolutely perfectly. For example, the somber, repressed yet somehow stately music in Stage 2, together with the orange sunset, is pure magic. Rarely does artwork and music fit so well together in games of any generation. As for how it actually feels to play the game and ingenuity of level design, it's very good also. Enemies don't have unreasonably fast patterns that become frustrating, hit detection feels like it's in the player's favor, and there are some innovations too. Like in Stage 3 where you have to hit a switch to open doors, and then make it past them before time runs out and they close again. To be honest, a lot of it is just jumping and slashing, but there's a healthy balance of horizontal and vertical platforming, and it never once feels tedious. Most of the levels aren't particularly difficult, but the bosses become extremely difficult, most noticeably in Stages 3 and 4, and expect the player to have godlike mastery over the jump momentum and hit detection. Unless you're one of those people who beats Ninja Gaiden on one life, it's probably going to feel discouraging at first. But I hope you'll give some of your precious time to Moon Crystal, because the boss patterns are learnable, and the feeling of intrigue that traversing its world provides is worth the effort. I don't have very many complaints with Moon Crystal. I think the most unpleasant part was the birds in Stage 4. These come flying at you much too fast to avoid unless you already know what's coming, and I think my viewers know just how unimpressed I am with that type of game design. Thankfully, the other 98% of the game doesn't have this problem, so they didn't sour my experience too much. Other than that, the very last level comes out of nowhere with all kinds of platforming tricks and is a significant jump in difficulty over the first 5 stages. I would probably emphasize this as a problem more, but it just so happens that I played through Android Assault on the Sega CD not long before making this video, which has one of the foulest jumps in difficulty on the last level in gaming history. So Moon Crystal is kind of getting off the hook by default. If Moon Crystal were stripped down to just its action mechanics, it would be a good game. Maybe not the best on the console, but a solid 8 out of 10. But Moon Crystal combines good game design with stunning animation, entertaining story sequences, and inspiring artwork and music in a way that raises it above most other games from the same era. It's clearly the product of a very talented group of people, and I wish I could find out more about who the designers were, but unfortunately the only name from the credits I recognized was the composer, Tawara Tsukasa. I mentioned I was putting off reviewing Moon Crystal because I wanted to spend more time playing it, but there's actually one more reason. As you would expect from a great game made towards the end of a console's lifespan and only released in Japan, it's really expensive. If you want it complete, you're looking at least a $350 investment, and if you're limited to eBay, probably a lot more. A part of me feels guilty about recommending a game that I know is going to be outside of most people's budget. But the fact is, the people who made it never expected it to cost this much. So I'm not in a place to judge people who decide to use less than legal means to play it. That's going to wrap up this episode. Thanks for checking it out. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.